set, go!
Hello and welcome to Weird Heat. I'm Brian Altano. This is Max Scoville. And
Hello.
Today we are talking about toys.
This is one of our favorite topics in the world.
We've done a lot of sad, miserable, morose topics on this show before, and I think it's probably time to do something that's a little more upbeat and fun, which, you know, might also still get sad and miserable and morose. So, what are toys?
That's a great question. Like, I think by definition, a toy is like anything that is designed solely for the purpose of play.
Yes.
So like that, does that mean games are toys?
I've gotten into this debate with myself and others, and even on social media before, about whether or not video games are toys, whether or not musical instruments are toys. I would say, or computers, really, anything. I would say for the purpose of this discussion, we can focus on toys as sort of the tactile, tangible, small, plasticky, figure-shaped things.
Tactile is a key word there.
Yeah.
And also, like, toys are like games that don't have rules. Like, they're a thing that, I mean, obviously, you could be like, yeah, a ball is a toy. But if you play a game with a ball, then it becomes a game. You know, it's sort of a set of, I don't know. We're getting you know, complicated here. I want to talk about action figures.
Yeah, we could talk about that. I think that's an important sort of difference right there, because action figures to me are something I gravitated to as a very young kid, and the more I think about them as an adult, action figures and cars and dolls and all this kind of stuff that kids love, I put them next to like art and music and Santa Claus in the categories of things that kids really love and that many people just grow out of forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, toys are a thing that there's that like Bible verse that's like, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, and then I put away my childish things, and it was like everyone died at like age 23 back then. Yeah, everyone had like lead in the water, and just.
You got married when you were 12 and you had 4 kids.
And the coolest toy was probably like a stick that had like a leaf on it or something.
But no, that's actually important that you bring that up, because I think that something that's really fascinating about toys is, like art and like music, people in the most primitive scenarios, in the most sort of like resourceless environments in history, find a way to make toys. I mean, we see this in sort of like in art museums and ancient cultures and stuff like that, and history museums. Children will build dolls and figures and action figures and stuff like that.
Also, I mean, you look at like ancient shit, and it's funny. We went to the Museum of Natural History in New York together, and we were in New York for Comic-Con, and what we were doing there was we're walking around and like shooting videos about all these brand new collectibles and toys and action figures, and then we're like we had some free time, so we went to the museum. We walked around and we looked at all these little like figurines and trinkets, and we were like, man, these new amiibo are really really letting us down. And it's it's like ancient like totems and like little statuettes.
And like most things, there are the versions of those things that children are making and playing with, and then there's the version that the adults are playing with and making, or not really playing with, posing or letting sit there. And the adults are always like, this is not a toy. Like for me, when I was a little kid, my dad was really into sports and I was not, and I had action figures and he had sports trophies. And like if I went and moved them around, he'd be like, those aren't toys. And I'd be like, why? I mean, it's a figurine of a man.
I remember at a really young age going to like an old school Italian barbershop, and this dude who I could barely understand, who smelled like cigars, had like all of these gorgeous like die-cast model cars up on a shelf, and they were all like these old Ferraris, and all I wanted to do was play with them, but they were clearly not for playing.
Right?
Like, they're not toys; they're for displaying.
Yeah, which I always found very strange, because I think nowadays. I think it's more socially acceptable to embrace toys, toy culture, to be an adult with a toy on your desk.
I mean, we've made a career out of it because we're lucky like that.
I do think I find it interesting to see toys in places that don't usually have them. Like if you pick the most buttoned up person that you know in your life or at your job. The biggest like corporate dude might have a toy somewhere, but doesn't really consider it a toy.
Mm-hmm. And I think you were talking about Judge Reinhold from the Santa Claus, and how he's like, I want the weenie whistle.
Yeah, he's got that hot dog whistle, and he's like,
Whistles for weenies.
Yeah, that's his callback to being like, this is from a simpler time. So I would say, the cool thing about toys is that, and I know you definitely feel the same way, is that they've always been there for me, and I've always been there with them. They've always been a part of my life. I've talked on many shows about how I went to MGM Studios when I was a kid, and I saw a bunch of Disney animators in this like glass box, and they were working on something. It was part of like this tour, and they had toys all over the desk, and I grabbed my dad's like pant leg, and I yanked on it, and I was like, those are adults. They have toys on their desk. And he was like, yeah, that's what they do. And I'm like, you can do that? And he was like, they can do that. And I was like, why doesn't everybody do that? And he's like, well, some jobs, they don't want you to do that. And I was like, well, I want a job where they want you to do that. And then I got one. And, not everybody has that, but a lot of people find a way to they put like a Funko Pop or like, the thing we saw a lot in the 80s and 90s was like that, the dashboard bobbleheads and stuff.
Yeah, bobbleheads were a big one. I think it's funny how there's like, obviously if you get like, if you get collector grade action figures, people are going to be like, you nerd, you old dork. But if you're like, I don't know, if you get like a sports bobblehead, it's acceptable.
Yeah.
I think it's funny when there's like, I don't know, obviously there's different sort of, tiers to it. And there's like there's the person who's like, yeah, man, I love Star Wars. I got a little Darth Vader figure on my desk. And then there's the guy who's like, I have an entire room dedicated to my Sideshow Collectibles quarter scale premium format figures.
Yep.
They're all lit, and I dust them every day with an air duster. And it's like, all right, well, how much are you into this shit? How much? And then on the flip side, obviously there's like you look, a lot of the stuff we're into is considered boys' toys like action figures, and I think there's a similar one with dolls. I don't know if it's as common or as accepted, but you see like, I don't know, there's women who collect like porcelain dolls and shit like that.
Well, okay, so I think there's totally like there's a sort of gender scenario happening there where there's acceptable levels of certain things, and maybe I'm crazy here, but I think that like if I bought a bunch of like male Star Wars action figures, or like a high-end Star Wars action figure, and I displayed it in my living room, and people came over, they'd be like, oh, that's cool, it's a good conversation piece. But like if my wife had like 6 dolls from her childhood in the living room, it'd be creepy. Why is that?
I mean, I think it's like how old she is.
I think it's also because they make horror movies about dolls and not about action figures.
Yeah, dolls. It's also like what were you growing up with? There's obviously, right. I don't know, they do make collector grade Barbies, but there are like less of them. I feel like there's almost an easier segue like for like, so quote unquote girls' toys to the idea that something like Barbie is setting you up for adulthood. Mm-hmm. It's setting you up to go shopping or to like play dress up or whatever, and it's like you go buy actual jewelry or actual clothes, whereas like with boys, like I guess there is a correlation here, but most boys are like, well, I love G.I. Joe as a kid, now I'm going to go and buy an aircraft carrier,
right?
Like there's obviously you can join the real military, or you can get really into like guns and tactical stuff, but like I don't know, if you love Star Wars toys, you can't like grow up to be a Star Wars character. Whereas if you love Barbie, you can.
I've never shot a rocket.
Right.
But I've done that with action figures thousands of times, and I think a reason children gravitate towards toys is because children are extremely limited in their mobility. They're incapable of doing so many things. They are constantly told no. They are too short to ride certain rides. They can't drive cars. They can't really run that fast. But you give them an action figure, and all of a sudden, they would sort of create these fictitious worlds. And I don't know how you played with toys, but I assume because you're a creative dude and you're a good writer that you came up with insane narratives for all of them. Mm-hmm. And that was a big part of, and I think that's something that I've definitely left behind in my childhood. I'm excited to explore again with my kid, but as an adult, I don't really play with toys in the sense of where I'm just doing voices and sound effects.
No, we pose them. We put them in funny poses and like take a picture or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's funny though, because like I think video games have very much filled that void for me.
Yeah.
In that one thing that I always loved about video games is they felt almost like. Looking back to like 16-bit like platformers and things, like Super Metroid felt like playing with action figures. Like to have like Samus jumping around there and to have all these little compartments to go into and like new weapons and stuff. It felt like almost a diorama, when you look at how that's laid out, it's very much like that. Mm-hmm. And that sense of, I always loved games where you were like your avatar could get into a vehicle. Like I always thought that Metal Slug was an incredibly toyetic game because it had that same feeling of like, aha, like when you put the little guy in like in the Metal Slug and he's walking around, you're like, that felt like putting a G.I. Joe in a vehicle.
Blaster Master was the same thing. It was one of my favorite games growing up. I've never thought about it like that.
Yeah,
but that makes perfect sense.
I think one of my favorite things about like Saints Row the Third has like I still think one of the best vehicles, which is like the VTOL jet, which totally managed to hit that, like, it scratched that same itch that playing with a really cool G.I. Joe vehicle did as a kid,
right?
Or like a really cool Star Wars vehicle, to be like, yes, like this thing has like, it has different like gizmos and gadgets on it, it has like different weapons, and it can like change flight modes, and it was just. When you're a kid, you're playing with like a toy, and you're flipping switches and you're moving these pieces around, and your imagination is less limited by like reality. Like you're less aware of the world around you. You're able to block that stuff out because you haven't fully developed. When you're an adult, there's that sort of that suspension of disbelief has almost like a higher proof to it. So you need to like you've got a lot more disbelief to suspend.
Yes. Yeah, so it gets tougher to kind of wrap your head around.
And that's where I think games come into play, because they're like, and you see this with, I remember like playing pretend as a kid. You run around the woods with like a sword, and then there reaches a point where you're like, what's the point? Like, what? I need an objective here. I can't just fight a tree and say it's a dragon. Like, I got to have something. And that's why you have stuff like D&D, where there's an element of like challenge to it.
There's rules, there's an end game, all that kind of stuff.
There's stuff that's out of your control without actually hurting you. And if you're really into it, you can go LARP. But
that was the funny thing is I used to play with G.I. Joes all the time with my brothers, and the cool thing is like with action figures in general is that I think it does a fantastic, as a medium, they do a fantastic job of imbuing a sort of creativity that I don't think you find in almost anything else as a kid. Because when you're playing in the backyard and you're pretending you're a wizard, you're fighting a tree, whatever, it's sort of like you have to do a lot of the heavy lifting of the creativity on your own. But when you grab an action figure, you're sort of like, here's this character, but I don't know a lot about him. But I can create a fictitious backstory about him. I can create his weakness, his enemies. But then you put him next to somebody else. Like when I was a little kid, I had Playmobil, but I also had G.I. Joe. I also had Masters of the Universe. I had X-Men, all those things. And so you would put them together all in a box, and you'd open up this box and you'd start reaching in and you'd grab a whole bunch of different things. And you'd be like, oh, well, okay, so these three guys are on this team against these guys over here. And so your backdrop would then become your living room. And I got really lucky growing up because my mom, when I was like 9 or 10, decided to go back to school for architecture. And she started making cities and buildings, and she would take balsa wood and foam core and build out these entire things, and for her college theses would get in front of a room and she would pitch these things, and she would come home sometimes ecstatic and we'd go out to dinner, and sometimes she would come home crying and be like, my building got torn apart. And I'd always, every single time, be like, are you done with it? And she'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, can I have it? And she'd go, okay. And I would cut in trap doors.
That's
and
awesome.
I would tag the outside. I would paint doors on it and windows and graffiti and all this other stuff. And I would have these huge play sets for my Ninja Turtles and,
Dude, that's so
Batman.
funny. I had a friend or friends growing up whose parents were architects. And I remember seeing those around. But the problem was those were always like those things that you think are toys, but you can't touch them.
Yes.
It was always like, don't be careful. Those trees are very delicate. And I'm like, but I'll be gentle. Like, let me put the micro machines on there. Like,
it was like perfect scale for that.
It was awesome. No, but I think that there's that, what you said about like G.I. Joe stuff and not necessarily knowing a character's backstory is interesting. Some of my formative years, I had this giant, so growing up, it's funny, I didn't have a lot of like older, like I didn't have any older siblings or anything. I had like my mom's friends who had like kids who were like way older, to the point that they were giving away their entire like childhoods.
Right.
And my first exposure to Star Wars was actually going to a dinner party at like one of my mom's friends' houses, and they're being like, oh, there's some old toys up in so-and-so's room. You can play with these. And it was like Return of the Jedi toys without context of Return of the Jedi, and being like, why is there a giant slug man with like skeletons under his like dais? Like, who are these? Like, what are these dinosaurs that you put like skeleton-looking spacemen into? Like, what is the context of anything? Like, so Boba Fett, my favorite character. The first time I saw Slave One, his spaceship, I had no idea what it was. Right. It was a different dinner party, and it was always that sort of hand-me-down without any kind of like education aspect to it.
Yeah.
And Slave One is a weird-looking ship. I remember thinking it was like a telescope. like my thinking of it, it's actually weird. I thought it was because it doesn't look like it's supposed to fly. I thought it was like something you laid flat and like the end of it shot up like a.
Well, it looks like a periscope, which they sold as toys all the time when you were kids. It has handles on the side. It looks like something you hold up, or like a one of those viewfinders or something.
Anyway, I got like a massive like box of toys from like one of these old family friends, and in it I had it was Castle Grayskull. Not knowing that was from He-Man.
Right.
A handful of Masters of the Universe. I don't think it was more G.I. Joes, though. And the problem with Castle Grayskull is like the He-Man figures can't actually fit through the door. Like it's kind of a crappy scale for that. G.I. Joe, it's perfect. That is a massive playset for those. And then there were like a handful of vehicles, like the Snowcat and like some like hover jet thing. And I didn't know who any of these people were. So I was just like, well, these are my characters now, and I will make up the rules for who they are. And I think there was like a mask figure in there too, and I was like, this is their dwarf friend. There's their small man that he hangs out with.
And you don't know the difference when you're a kid, because when you go to a toy store and you're a kid, or even now, there's 3 types of toys. There are unlicensed toys, which are basically like animals and soldiers and jungle cats and shit like that. Then there's licensed toys, which is Star Wars, Masters of the Universe, G.I. Joe. Then there's unlicensed toys that wish they were licensed toys, which is like bootleg ninjas that have card backs and like wrestling figures and stuff like that. Like, and you see those. I had a bunch of those too.
Remember the corpse?
Yeah.
The corpse?
Yeah, the corpse. Like if you go to a dollar store now, go to like a Dollar General, Dollar Down or whatever. I always love browsing the toy section there because they don't have licenses unless something went horribly awry and something ends up there. With like that store Five Below catches a lot of shit that didn't sell well. And they'll always have like they'll have bootleg G.I. Joes, and they will be really shoddily put together, and like
some of those have like really good sculpts though.
Yeah, totally.
I was always blown away at like when there's a toy that's like it shouldn't be of good quality, but it is.
Right. And so that's going back to, I think when you're a little kid, you start getting introduced to toys in a very simple, whimsical way. And I'm noticing this now with my daughter. We hand her like this elephant rattle as like one of her favorite things. She also has this like butterfly that has crinkly wings, and it becomes about tactile and feeling and stuff like that. Little by little, she will start to hone in on certain things that she likes because they're small versions of things she wants to be someday, like a ballerina or a dancer, or sometimes like with boys you get like it's like a cop or something.
No, you were saying, I think you read some study about how if you hand a kid a toy, if you're like, here's this thing, it's not as good than if you let them discover it themselves.
Yeah, exactly. It's completely true. And they will gravitate towards it if it's just there because they're sort of like, what is that? You don't want to remove that inquisitiveness that they have. And I think that's such a big part of toys. And obviously, again, back to the gender thing, like I think that like a lot of kids get shoehorned into that. And a big part of that is the toy design and the packaging. If there's a girl on the box, a boy will gravitate to it less. And vice versa. And so you can actually convince a girl to buy some badass action figure if there's some badass girl in the box playing with it. And that's all that starts at a very simple, very young age. But again, like as a boy, as a young kid, as we were, you can't drive a car, but you can get a vehicle and you can put a guy in it and you can make him drive, and you can drive on the walls and the ceiling and everything. You can't fly a helicopter or shoot lasers or rockets, and you get all that stuff. And then sometimes you see a toy, it's like, it's a cop, it's a fireman, it's like, I could tangibly be that someday. But when my parents asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I was like 5, I said dinosaurs, because I had a bunch of dinosaur toys, and they were fucking cool, Yeah.
No, it's funny. I don't, thinking back, like, what did I want to be when I grew up? I think I found a letter that I wrote in high school, like an essay about how I wanted to try to get into toy design. And if that didn't work out, I wanted to like write for Toy Fair magazine, which again, these are all like, I don't know. I think you have to do like pretty heavy industrial design to get into toy making.
Yeah.
So I never really pursued that because that's a lot of math. But as far as like covering toys, like I effectively managed to find the equivalent of that. Like a print magazine about action figures isn't really a thing in this day and age. Right. Doesn't really work. But I don't know. Like to find that balance of like sort of those skills. Toy Fair magazine was the coolest growing up because it was like, this was that was the basis for Robot Chicken. Like it was a bunch of dudes who were like, we're way too old for this. Let's make fun of ourselves, but also the things that we're playing with. And it was about like adult collectors. It wasn't a children's toy magazine. It was
not at all.
These are like,
I mean, they had lewd captions and stuff like that. They had I remember flipping through the pages of that. It was that and Star Wars magazine that convinced me that there was a high-end like adult toy collector market. And that was always fascinating to me. I got really into the original, I believe it was it Hasbro or LJN, made wrestling action figures. And the cool thing about them was I learned a ton about toy design just through them and through G.I. Joe because one, they showed up in waves. And the difference in the waves was the card backs. And so the card backs had different colors. And one of them was the yellow card set. And the thing about wrestling action figures was that they effectively started, like most toy sets do, with 4 or 5 different molds, and then they shoehorned every single character into those molds. And what sucked about that is that every one of them had an action feature, and some of them were worse than others. And this one guy, Marty Jannetty, he was part of the, fucking Shawn Michaels' tag team, the Heartbreakers, whatever the fuck. Or the Rockers, I think they were called. His action feature was that his legs folded into his torso, and he had like this spring bounce.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't know a goddamn thing about wrestling. I know that action feature.
Which is fun, but it makes for a shitty toy because like you can't do leg locks or anything like that. And so little by little over the years, they started introducing new sculpts. And with that, they started introducing new characters. And so every now and then they'd be like, well, we have Yokozuna, who's this sumo wrestler. So we can't just like shoehorn an old sculpt, we got to make a brand new one. Or they'd be like, we have Bam Bam Bigelow. He's got a pot belly and a bald head. Like, how do we make this guy? And so I remember the yellow card set came out, and we wanted all of them. And it was like Owen Hart, Razor Ramon, all those fucking 90s wrestlers. And we started calling toy stores. And no one had them. And then we would specifically be on the highway on a road trip, and we'd be like, Dad, Toys R Us, pull over. We got to look. We got to see if they have Yokozuna. And we'd run in, they didn't have it. And then they started a comic book and card show in the top floor of the arcade in my town. And we would go there all the time and look for them. And then we didn't have eBay, but we had Prodigy, like very early on, was this like sort of like BBS bulletin board system.
Oh, man.
And you could go on there and people would be like, there was a toy one. And it was basically like the earliest version of a toy subreddit. Whoa. And there'd be guys and they'd be like, hey, I'm selling the yellow card set and it's $70. And we'd go to my dad and we'd be like, here's the deal, Dad. These toys are $5 individually. But if we buy all 6 of them or 7 of them right now, plus shipping, we won't ever have to bother you to go to Toys R Us again.
Oh, my God.
And so we ordered the set, and this fucking box came, and I remember just getting this giant box in the mail, and it was, like...
What year was this? Like, when was this?
This had to be like 93, 94.
God, that's
like that, 95.
You were
maybe.
going on the internet to buy toys that early?
Yeah, very
that's
early.
Crazy.
And so it showed up, and now that, we get boxes of toys from Hasbro and stuff, I know what they look like, right? To get those like sort of big flat packs.
A case breakdown,
like a case. Yeah. And so they sent us a case of toys that we ordered. We saved up money all summer or whatever. And they were, the outside, the box was bubble wrapped, and we opened it up, and there was like, the cards hadn't been punched out yet, and it was just like, what is this? Like, how do you get this? And like, I remember getting Oriental Trading Magazine and being like, okay, so I know what it's like when somebody buys something to sell in a store, right? But this was the first time as kids we were like, oh, there's like a whole market behind this. There's a whole universe behind this.
Dude, the first thing I ever pre-ordered was a Boba Fett action figure, and it was the 300. It was like, they were like, this is the 300th Star Wars figure, the 300th 4-inch Star Wars figure we're gonna ever put out. And it was like, in reality, they'd put out like 700 at that point if you're counting all the variations. And I had to buy it from entertainmentearth.com, which is still around, but that's a site. If you run like a comic shop or whatever, you can buy cases of toys there. And I had to. This was 2000 or 2001, and I had to convince my mom, like, hey, I really want this toy, and it's going to be hard to find. And I need to get it on the internet. And we lived in like the middle of nowhere, Connecticut, so there's no way I was going to be able to go to stores and like shop around for it. And to be fair, I never actually saw this figure on store shelves anywhere. So like, I went for it, and then I pre-ordered it. And it was so far in advance. I think at that point it was like, it might have been like 2 months or something. Like it dropped in like November, and I was trying to like pre-order it in the summer. And I was at summer camp following that, and I would go to the computer lab, and I would just like look at pictures of it. Like, and there were only like 2 photos of it going around. I would just obsess, and then it finally showed up, and it was like one of the most, and I was probably way too old for that, like to be that obsessed with one toy. But I mean, it was exciting, you know. As for like the difficulty of getting a toy, I have one of those right here. I have my Toy Biz Deadpool figure from 1993. And you're talking about like driving all over the place. That's what like we totally had to do with this. Like
really?
Going every toy store, like every KB Toys, every time we went to like Caldor or Kmart or whatever, I would go to the toy aisle and dig through all the X-Men, X-Force figures, and never saw this figure. And then somehow, I don't know how this came about. The first time I ever went to New York City, we went to FAO Schwartz, which later became Toys R Us. And they sold a special like store exclusive 4-pack that was Deadpool, Cable. Oh God, I want to say it was like Gideon and then like Trevor Fitzroy. It was like some deep cut ass like weird like background X-Force characters. But I finally got this Deadpool figure and like I was so stoked. Like for whatever reason, I just latched onto Deadpool from an early age. I was like, this dude is sick. He looks like Ninja Spider-Man with guns.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm like, obviously, I still love Deadpool.
And
like
he's a very toyetic character too, right?
Like
he's got his sword that pops out. He's got a gun glued into his hand.
He's like a more colorful version of Snake Eyes from from G.I. Joe.
The Toy Biz stuff back then especially was fantastic.
It was hilarious. It was like full of dumbass action features. That jumping Yokozuna or whatever the jumping one. I had a more advanced version that was Beast, and it was the whole thing was they're like, we can have him have bendable legs and still do the jumping thing, and so his knees were spring loaded and his ankles were jointed.
Wow.
And so the idea was you would push down on his shoulders and he would basically like buckle under your weight, and then it was supposed to launch himself forward. But in reality, you just push down and Beast's feet would just slip out from under him.
Yep.
So it like never worked. It's a cool toy, but it never worked.
It's really funny because like this year, Hasbro put out the Star Wars Black Series 6-inch scale Gamorrean Guard, and he's one of my favorite designs in all of Star Wars. He's got articulate fucking jowls. His mouth opens and closes. He's got all these
kinds
weapons
of sandwiches and
like
stuff in there. It's great.
Yeah, he's got like this weird soft goods pouchy belt thing on. And I went to Target on the way to work here at IGN as a man in my 30s. I stopped by Target like 3 separate days because he was Target exclusive, and I couldn't find him because why would a city Target is small to begin with. FAO Schwartz is a fantastic place to buy toys, or was, because they wanted their displays to look good. So when you walked into an FAO Schwartz, they always had mountains of action figures. It was the only place to get like something like an April O'Neil, which were really only like one per case. And so I went like 3 times, couldn't get it, and then did the same thing. I went on eBay, ordered the Gamorrean Guard, paid the upcharge. It showed up. I tore it open in front of you in our mailroom.
You were so excited.
I was so excited, and it's like
the first thing you did is you lifted up its little fur skirt and showed me its ass.
Yeah, he has a great butt.
He's got a big dunker. That's
yeah,
a great
he's a
toy.
big pig man, and Luke chokes him out. In Return of the Jedi,
what do you like about toys now? Like, what's your favorite thing about a new toy? Like, I don't even know this. We hang out, we play with toys all the time, but like I don't know what you're like.
Well, so I think for me is they bring me joy. I find them incredibly interesting to look at. I also am not one of those people that can write or work or create in a very sort of blank. I see a lot of those like Apple commercials where people are just like, they're just like in this white room and they're working and they're like, oh, my screenplay. I can't do that. I need sort of like visual clutter around me and colors. I need it to look like a sort of, graffiti wall. That, and I think there's that kind of like that notion of picking them up and moving them around. I'm in my hand right now. You can't see because if you're listening, but I have the Figure Arts Bruce Lee, and he's fantastic. He's got different faces that pop on and off, and different hands, and some of them are fists, and he holds weapons and stuff like that.
For anyone who can't see this or doesn't know this, SH Fig Arts is a Japanese line. I think it's Bandai makes it.
Yeah.
And they are probably the best. They're like 6-inch figures. They got a bunch of licenses, and they are the most gorgeously sculpted, super crazily articulated figures, and they have like alternate hands and faces, and they're
so much fun to pose and to play with. And I don't mean play with like I go, I'm Bruce Lee, I'm here to do kick and box.
No, it's
no
like action features.
Yeah.
It's just
But you and I will be having a conversation at our desk, and we'll be working at a headline, or we'll be thinking of an angle for an interview, and I'll just pick him up and pose him and then put him back down, and he'll be doing this like ready to fight pose, or he'll be dabbing, or he'll be like sitting on the floor. And
and there's something you're just moving. There's something tactile about that.
Yeah.
You're like
I love that, and it's also, you know, I think there's a collecting aspect of it too, you know, and that I had to catch myself on. Like I noticed with Amiibo, I was like, I'm gonna get all of them, and then they were like, there's 130 of them, and I was like, I don't want to get all of them anymore.
You know, it's funny. I've always been into collecting. I've never thought of collecting as being that
set
approach. I was always like, I want to get, even when I played Pokemon, which is like virtual collecting, I never was like, oh, I have to catch them all. I was like, I'll get the ones I like.
Yep.
I'll get the ones that I think are cool looking. I'm not going to fuck around and waste time with things that don't interest me.
Or you pick like a very hyper focused, you know, sort of vertical line through it all. Like you collect Boba Fett, I collect Bib Fortuna. You're trying to get all of the basically 90s X-Men right now.
Like I don't even know when that's gonna. They keep putting out more like bullshit shit like Trevor Fitzroy or whatever. they're like here's an alternate Kitty Pryde, and I'm like,
Well, also they're like, Rogue is Comic-Con exclusive, and Silver Surfer you can only buy him at Walgreens and blah blah blah.
So I actually got really into Boba Fett's early on, specifically because there weren't a lot of him.
Yeah,
and I think it was like I was like, Boba Fett's my favorite character. And by the way, like people are always like, he's not a great character. He is the most toyetic character.
Yes,
he debuted as a cartoon character and then became a mail away exclusive toy that was supposed to have a launching missile and they never did. It's a whole kind of like story about it. That legacy is like my favorite thing because it's everything that, I don't know, everything that Star Wars and toys and growing up is to me. There's like, you know, there's this sort of aesthetic appeal, there's this mystery, there's this waiting for a thing you pre-ordered, and then there's the disappointment of when it's not what you expected.
Yeah. If you dig up the old, any of the first few runs of, or really all of them, for the original Kenner Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi figures, the action features they have are practically non-existent outside of some of the, you know, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker have this miserable little
telescoping lightsaber.
This miserable little lightsaber. It just looks like a dog's dick, and it pops out of their hand. And then Boba Fett comes along, and they're like, we're gonna put a fucking rocket in his
goddamn
backpack.
Rockets out of his fucking, and then he never did.
Yeah.
This one I've got and I'm holding up is actually, I love this so much. So Gentle Giant is a company that mostly, they don't really do toys. They do mostly collectibles. They got their start, the first time I heard about them was that they were the ones who perfected real scanning technology. And I was at like peak Star Wars toy collecting hype, probably around Attack of the Clones, so like 2002. And they announced, when Attack of the Clones was about to come out, they announced some like huge shit that was going down. They were like, look, we've got a couple things that we're doing to these figures. First of all, we're taking all of the actors and we are scanning their faces and then using that data to create a 3D sculpt that we then print. Like this is before 3D printing was a thing you could just do whenever. Right. And so they're like, these are photorealistic versions of actors in the film. And then they were like, they're also going to have crazy new features like the lightsabers hilts are going to be made of metal and they're going to have little magnets in their hands. And like coming from like an era of Star Wars figures where like elbow joints was exciting, for them to be like, shit's about to go off the fucking chain. The lightsaber blades will be removable. They're going to have sculpted like sparks at the bottom of them. I was just like, this is getting insane. I'm so excited about Star Wars stuff. Gentle Giant was behind like the scanning stuff. And they also got the license to do minibus. So they did these, high-end $50, $60, high-end collectibles, which I was always like, these are cool. I will never be able to afford them. And then fast forward a ways, and they decided that with their background of scanning real actors and making high-end collectible Star Wars toys, or high-end collectibles, toys for lack of a better word, they started scanning the original Kenner action figures and then blowing them up and making like giant versions of them.
Yeah, and they're phenomenal.
And it's I'm the one I have here is a giant version of the original 70s, 80s Boba Fett, where they were like they took, and there's something really funny to me about like they were like, yeah, we've scanned. We've scanned Tamira Morrison, we've scanned Ewan McGregor's faces. We've taken like real human actors and been like, but what if we just scanned the things that we loved and just made them slightly larger?
Right.
So they make giant versions of like classic toys, and there's something like to use that like fidelity of technology to create large reproductions of like goofy 70s figures that were made by dudes in Ohio that they sculpted out of clay and shit. Like there was just it's so bizarrely roundabout.
Yeah. No, I have this in my hand right now. This is the original Dengar action figure, if you're listening again. And I've talked about this story on Twitter before, but my neighbor gave this to me, and it's like still got dirt on it from my backyard.
No, you got to set that up. You got to set that whole story. Tell that whole story about the Dengar. I love it.
So I had just moved to the suburbs with my family, and I didn't know what a backyard was because I used to live in Jersey City, and we just had like a dirt patch back there that my grandfather grew tomatoes and figs in. And so we got to New Jersey, and I was in the backyard burying my brother. And what I was doing was I was bored and I didn't have any toys, and so I dug a hole and I was just I put my little brother in it, who was just like a baby at the time, and I started putting dirt in his belly. First of all, my parents were idiots for being like, "You should babysit this baby in the backyard," and I was an idiot for being like, "I don't know, what should we do? I guess I'll put you in a hole and cover you in dirt." Like, we were just playing, we didn't know what we were doing, and this guy yells over from next door. It's this little kid. He's like climbing a tree, and he was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't know, I'm putting my brother in a hole and burying him." And he's like, "Don't do that." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Because you can't bury a kid." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "Don't do that."
That feels like a much dumber version than like a G.I. Joe PSA.
Yeah,
where it's like, "Hey kid, don't bury that boy. Come play with these G.I. Joe toys."
So he comes downstairs and he goes, "Hey, I'm Jeff." And I'm like, "I'm Brian. And this is my brother. And sorry, I'm burying him." And we dig him out. And he was like, "Do you like Star Wars?" And I was like, "What's that?" And he's like, like Star Wars. It's just like the wizard and like the man, and they go to space and they fight like this robot, and there's like a pig. And it's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Doesn't make any sense. And he goes, "Well, I have an extra toy if you want." And I was like, "What is it?" And he goes, "This is Dengar." I don't even know if he said the guy's name. And he hands me this fucking yellowed, sad, just toilet mummy. This guy, he's got like lacrosse pads on. I thought he was like this hockey player that got lost in the Sahara Desert. It doesn't make any sense. His backpack looks like a snow cone maker. Like and he's got like a towel on his head, it just makes no sense.
That's what all of us. If you look at if you were a child and your understanding of the world is like you're still piecing it together. Like maybe you know what a fireman is, like maybe you know what a policeman is, and then you hand somebody a Star Wars figure, and you're like, what job is like that? A wizard with snakes on his head. He's like, what is this?
He's a
mummy.
He's a lacrosse
spaceman.
mummy.
Like, what the fuck is he doing?
And then like what I also didn't understand, I was like, oh well, I haven't seen Star Wars yet, but I'm sure he plays a significant role. I didn't use those words back then. But I was like, I'm sure he's the hero of Star Wars. And then I watched Return of the Jedi first, so that was weird. But then I went back and watched the other ones, and I was like, "Oh, there he is." And they don't fucking. Did they even say his name in that movie?
Hell no. He doesn't say his name. He doesn't do anything. He just people are like, Boba Fett doesn't do anything. No, Dengar doesn't do anything. Yeah, Dengar doesn't even look cool. Boba Fett at least looks cool. Dengar looks like a goddamn drunk dude who's wrapped up in toilet paper.
Yeah. And so they cut to him, this dollar store toilet mummy, and I'm like, "Oh, this is it. This is the part where my toy." Comes to life, and then like obviously he's gonna beat up a bunch of he's gonna kill Han Solo, and then he just stands there, and then Boba Fett talks, and IG-88 like I don't even think he chirps or anything.
I think IG-88 was seriously just like welded together. He didn't even have like the toys have more articulation than the actual.
And then there's fucking like Forlom and Zuckuss, these two like shitty bug men,
and they're all made out of like leftover pieces of other shit from other movies.
Yeah. And then it just ends. Like the movie ends, and like it's sad for Luke, but it's also sad for Dengar, who's a toy but never did anything.
Oh my god, I love that.
And so I had no idea. And so like that's my first introduction to Star Wars toys, which I still collect to this day. I still love to this day. I always will have a soft spot for them, no matter who's making them or what they look like.
So this is I have one of the weirdest introductions to Star Wars because I saw like a lot of it in bits and pieces on TV when I was probably 8 or 9. But the first time I saw a Star Wars movie straight through was actually at Frank Oz's house because I went to school with his kids.
Right.
And my first Star Wars toy that I'd gotten, for whatever reason, I was like, I like Star Wars enough to want the toys for Christmas, even though I haven't seen these films all the way through. Which is really weird when I think about that because I'm like a fake Star Wars fan or whatever.
Well, so many of the toys we bought when we were kids were tied to TV shows or comic books or movies. And so it was very odd to have ones that weren't.
Also, like even if you watch them in order, the original trilogy is confusing as shit because it's like, oh, episode 4, episode 5, episode 6. You're like, what? Excuse me, what? There's no Wikipedia, like there's no way to find out what's going on.
A New Hope begins with the feeling of walking into a movie theater late and being like, what did I miss?
Uh-huh. No, but so I got this toy. It was a Micro Machines transforming playset. It looks like 3PO's head, and it opens up into the Mos Eisley Cantina,
which I have on my desk right now. And it's fucking
great.
awesome.
It's like the best toy, and I got that and like a shitty wind up monster truck for it was like Christmas to the 1995. I want to say 95 or 96, and I was like, yeah, cool. Who the fuck are any of these characters?
Yeah.
And then I was over at my my friend's house.
By the way, one of your first Star Wars toys was like a bar.
Yeah, it was a bar, which is weird. That's not.
It was
like
a dive bar. There was
Yeah.
a notch in the center where you could put put a character. They all came with minifigs.
So I was over at my friend's house, whose dad played Yoda, and who like had grown up with Star Wars and stuff. And I'm just sort of getting into it, and I'm not like we were just pals from school, and I'm not like asking him all these stupid questions about Star Wars yet. Eventually, I did, and now we're not friends anymore. But but like I'm not trying to be like a Star fucker or anything, a Star Wars fucker or whatever. But I was like. Somehow it came up that I was like, I don't think I've seen these movies. And it was before the special editions hit theaters. They were out on VHS. They obviously had like, good, home theater shit because their dad was in movies and stuff. And I was like, I got a cool Star Wars toy for Christmas. It's like a funny bar. And they were like, oh. And I was like, I haven't seen the movie that's from. I don't know why do they go to the funny bar? Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, well, let's watch the movie. And so they put on Return of the Jedi, which has a different funny bar. It has the whole Jabba's Palace scene.
Right.
So I watch all of that, and I'm like...
Which is kind of less of a bar. I mean, R2's the bar in that movie.
And at that point, I'd seen chunks of Jedi. Like, I'd seen, like, the whole Ewok battle and everything, but I hadn't, for whatever reason, seen the very beginning. So I was like, I'd seen it all out of order at friends' houses or on TV, and I was really, really just completely confused. And I was like... So... I think it was a different bar. And they were like, oh, the other bar. And so we watched Return of the Jedi, and then we put on A New Hope.
Oh, my God.
And then I was like, oh, I get it now. I understand suddenly. And like the action feature in that playset, which makes total sense if you've seen the movie a million times, which I now have, is there's like a little tiny, like there's a little bar and like chairs and stuff. And there's two things that happen. There's like a cafe table, and there's two chairs by it. One of them you put Han Solo in, and the other one you put Greedo in.
And they're weird Micro Machine minifigs like because they can't
teeny tiny,
and they can't stand on their own.
All they can do is
two.
sit. They're all like squatting. They're not like the articulated Action Fleet ones. And you just put them on this little thing, and you push down on the table. And the idea is that that's supposed to replicate Greedo getting shot. So you push down, and like one of the chairs is spring loaded, so it goes, and then this little tiny figure of Greedo just flips over and just falls over dead. So you can be like, oh, who shot first? I don't know. And then there's like stormtroopers that there's a little button you push and they come through the door.
It's like it's like a flat piece of plastic that has pictures of stormtroopers on it?
No, it's like little tiny ones. They like wedge them in there, but it looks like
a trio.
It just looks like a closet.
Yeah,
and you just push this button in like 3PO's neck, and these two guys just burst through the doors and like, and that's it. And then it's like a bunch of weird ass D-list characters. I think it's one of the Duros, and then it's like Feltapern Travag, who according to like the expanded universe is like a salacious accountant. Like he's an imperial accountant who just fucks a lot. That's like so his backstory. Weird. So like my first Star Wars toy was a scene from a movie that takes place in a bar where a murder happens and there's all these like, scum and villainy characters milling around, and then the cops show up and I'm like, I don't understand the scene. And then I watched the movie and I was like, I still don't understand why this is a toy. So like, and then, the rest is history. Then I was like, I need to learn more about these strange characters in this faraway world and why they make toys of them.
There's that great scene in Tom Hanks' Big where he's working for a toy company and they're like, oh, we're going to make Transformers except the robots turn into buildings. And he's like, why? And they're like, kids love robots. And they're like, well, no one loves buildings. And I feel like a lot of the philosophy behind Star Wars toys was kind of that. Like they were like, these toys are selling well. Keep making them. All right, what should we make? Make that bar where that chair explodes and that door opens.
Well, I mean, obviously when episode 1 is about to come out, like we're all stoked on it, and like the whole thing was like everything that got announced. Like this is obviously gonna. It was like the whole Dengar thing. You're like, oh, this guy's gonna be awesome. They got Terrence Stamp. He's playing Chancellor Valorum. Well, that sounds like a badass guy. Chancellor Valorum?
I was living in New York at the time, and the Toys R Us Times Square, another massive toy store we can pour out a 40 for. There's really no big toy stores in New York anymore, and it's a fucking heartbreak. Or anywhere, really. Rest in peace, Toys R Us. Couldn't do this entire episode without saying that. And I went there, and they had apparently broken the street date on those toys. And I remember buying the Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan and just being like, this toy is fucking awesome. This movie's going to be fucking awesome.
Well, so The thing was, back then, they released the toys before the movie.
Yeah.
I think it was, they didn't call it Force Friday. They just called it like Episode 1 Street Date or whatever. And the date, I want to say that came out on, so for Attack of the Clones, I know that the street date for the toys was May 3rd. And the movie came out May 16th. I don't know why I still know that. I'm pretty sure I'm close to that. Fact check me, internet. Tell me I'm wrong. But there was like a solid 3 weeks there where you'd go and buy the toys and you'd be like, I bought the toys. I have no idea what any of these people do.
Right.
But they would have like fact files on the back, or they'd be like, oh, why does Jango Fett's head come off? That seems like kind of, it could be a relevant thing.
That's the thing. Like the way I talked about Dengar and expecting him to be the star of the movie, we still do that shit. You and me still do that with Star Wars toys.
No, now it's part of our job description where
Yeah.
we're like, who is this new Constable Zuvio character and what sort of scrapes and scrambles will he get into in The Force Awakens? And it's
We would look at it, we'd see Constable Zuvio on the shelf in Walgreens and we'd be like, well, surely this is the man that catches Rey and then she has to escape to the Millennium Falcon. No, he was in the movie for literally a quarter of a second, and if he had a longer scene, it was cut. Mm-hmm. And there was a like production still with him in it, but he's not there. He's also you will go anywhere to this day, and there will be 6 of him on the shelf. By the way, the one thing you alluded to for a second, thumbing through racks of action figures, looking and finding that one you're looking for, but just kind of judging them based on the side and how it got darker and darker back there, and being like, I think I see like Silver Surfer's arm.
That is
still
one
of my favorite
That's
feelings.
the best feeling in the world. And that you don't get that, like the closest you get to that is like maybe you find an eBay listing.
Yeah.
But for the most part, everything's organized, and it's like either you can buy the thing or you can't. Like it's all clearly parsed and everything. I feel like maybe toys are making a little bit of a comeback. Like
Totally,
obviously,
yeah.
I mean I think they kind of dip in and out, but like I hope they don't go away. Most recently, Mego. I always forget how you're supposed to say it, but like the toy company that from the 70s that kind of was they were like 9-inch dolls that had cloth clothing, and they had a bunch of weird superhero licenses. They recently got resurrected, and now all their licenses are like classic TV shows.
Oh, wow.
And I was at Target and I walked around a corner and there's like Fonzie, Peg Bundy, and then like characters from the Facts of Life who I don't even know because I never watched the Facts of Life, and they're all just chilling there on the shelf. And I was like, I wonder if they have Al Bundy. And I started doing that thing where I had to look through it. And I was like, fuck, it's been a minute since I did this, but I'm not about to go look for Al Bundy action figures online. I was like, because I'm here. Mm-hmm. So that sense of kind of discovery is really...
Did you find him?
No.
Keep looking.
I sent you a picture of Peg Bundy, though.
That was good. Thank you for that. That's why I think one of the main reasons phones were invented.
Yeah.
Send each other pictures of Peg Bundy action figures.
What a weird time we live in.
But yeah, I do. I'm totally with you. I think toys are making a comeback. I think for many, they never went away. And I think that embrace them. There are going to be people in your lives that tell you should grow out of it, but they have toys. They just don't call them that. Mm-hmm. They have precious moments. They have, bobbleheads. They have just Funko Pops, or they have, sports trophies. There's toys everywhere.
Yeah. Buy an action figure.
Yeah.
You don't even have to be like a nice one. Get like a little shitty one. Go get something. Go to a yard sale. Dig through a box.
I think it's like it's better than having like a stress ball on your desk or one of those like weird fidget cubes or whatever the fuck.
I don't know. I love toys so much. I just think they're
get a small Bruce Lee and pose him.
Get a large Boba Fett.
Yeah, just do it up.
This guy was actually a pain in the ass to track down.
Yeah.
Even like 38 years later, it's still a pain in the ass to get a Boba Fett figure.
Yeah, some things never change, man.
If you're curious more on toy stuff, also the show The Toys That Made Us on Netflix is phenomenal.
Yep.
God, I love that show. We should probably wrap this up, but maybe we'll talk about toys again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. There are great toy stores in pretty much every major city for the most part. And even if you can't find the big ones, there's always really cool small ones. New York has some great ones, Portland, Seattle. Just so look around. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I'm glad we got to talk about one of our favorite things in the world. Obviously, this show could have been 15 hours long, but I'm glad we kept it where
we can always talk about more.
Yeah.
If you want to hear us talk about toys more, check out IGN. We do Up at Noon over there, and we do lots of videos playing with toys.
Yeah.
On that front.
Max, where can people get more of the show, and where can people fund this show?
Please go to patreon.com/weirdheat and kick us $1 or $2. Help us keep the lights on. It's a very dim show, so we could use more lights.
That's true, and toys.
Yeah.
And also, you can check out weirdheat.com, buy some merchandise. Follow us on Twitter. That's at weirdheat. Same thing with Instagram, Facebook, all the other things. Join our Facebook group. It's really cool. A bunch of really just awesome, creative people in there.
Yeah, it's
dropping cool stuff.
Facebook.com/group/weirdheat. It's really cool to see that group just becoming its own thing.
Yeah.
And hop in there and share a photo of your favorite toy. You don't have to have it on hand. Maybe here's another one. Go on eBay and find your old favorite toy. Try to dig it up. See if you can find one used.
I did that with Rappin' Michelangelo, the Ninja Turtle action figure. That's like he's like half Run DMC, half Ninja Turtles, and I just
love that
him.
toy. I think there's a misconception that you need to like pay a fortune to get into toy collecting. You don't. You just buy the shit you think is cool. You know?
Just be careful buying anything plush because like they come from smokers' homes, and it's
don't get into plush. That could have bed bugs. I don't mess with that. I think toy collecting is great. I think plushies get nasty.
Yeah, get out of here, plushies. We're talking about toys.
Hell yeah.
Like real adults.
Boys' toys that shoot rockets, unless they're a danger to your eyes and throats, in which case they do not.
Hi-ya.
Ready, set, go! The battle continues. Harness the power. Some assembly required. Harness the power.